Hello, everybody. How's it going today? Yeah, pretty good. Everybody had good lunch? Yeah, all right. So as Jen mentioned, my name is Angelina Fabbro. I hail from Vancouver, Canada, as opposed to Vancouver, Washington, which I'm sure many of you are from. I'm Angelina Magnum on Twitter. Feel free to say hi. For example, if there's something that I covered in the talk that you have a question about, or if you happen to have some mobile edge cases that you think I might find interesting, I'm more than happy to talk to you about those things. So, mobile's a thing. It's a pretty important thing. You just gotta like throw some media queries into a page and then you're basically done, right? Basically need to focus on maybe one browser, two browsers, that's it. Okay, so there is a big problem, I think, with mobile development, and that's that actually there are a lot of really good tools. But later in the talk, you'll actually see why this is a problem. And my personal problem is that no one tool actually solves all of my problems for me when I'm doing mobile application development or mobile website development, depending on how you decide to frame your paradigm of development. So in my mind, whenever I'm dealing with CSS, there are two types of debugging that I'm dealing with. Layout debugging, or I'm dealing with performance debugging. Those are the things I care about most, and when I'm thinking about debugging tasks, I compartmentalize them into one of those two things. It's not always black and white, but for now, let's pretend it is. So today I'm going to talk to you about a little bit to do with what I do for my workflow when I'm developing a mobile and responsive website. In the past, I worked at a bespoke shop in Vancouver where I did mobile applications for the web and also for native. And then when I originally joined Mozilla, I was working on Firefox OS, and so I actually helped developers one-on-one take their applications, which were largely responsive web applications, and then make them work on these really low-powered, low-memory devices, which are being shipped across the world to other nations to ideally give people a smartphone experience where they would have otherwise purchased a feature phone for kind of about the same price point. And so this talk is sort of a collection of my tips and tools that along the way I've learned from other people and other companies that do a lot of mobile application development, things that I've had to like bash my head against the wall at 2 in the morning trying to figure out because I really wanted to help someone or ship my own thing. And I'm hoping that this talk gives people who are less familiar with mobile websites, kind of a quick place to go for some easy tips. And for those of you who are a little bit more seasoned with mobile development, I hope you learn about some cool tools as well. So for a manageable workflow, I think the really key thing is to get your layout right early. And in order to do that, you need to first think about who your target demographic is. Now, of course, we're at this lovely place called Florida, which is in the United States of America, and I'm from Vancouver, Canada. And so a lot of us here are probably from North America, and so we probably have a very North American-centric view of things. Of course, North America is not the entire world. If you're in South Africa, it's likely that you could be using a BlackBerry, Symbian, or Nokia device, or and probably Android as well. And you're actually most likely to be using Opera Mini as a browser, or maybe Mobile Safari. If you're here in North America, you're probably most likely to be using Mobile Safari, stock Android 2.3 browser. Yes, 2.3, we'll get to that in a moment. And of course, Chrome for Android, Firefox for Android. If you're in China, you might be using BlackBerry, Symbian, Android, Nokia Series 40, or you might be using the official Chinese government operating system. Yes, that's right. They designed their own operating system. It's a fork of Android. Have not previewed it myself. This was news to me. If you're in Venezuela, you're probably running Android or Firefox OS, and it's likely that you could be using the stock Android 2.3 browser as well. And so this really just goes to show that you're probably, how to put it. You can't always predict who your market is going to be. It's really nice to think that I am making a page for people that are like me in North America, and that's probably true, and maybe that's where you get most of your traffic. But why would you necessarily exclude customers from other regions by just not catering to the devices that they use or the browsers that they use? For example, as far as products go, the social network Orkut was a bomb in North America. Brazil totally loved it. My friend Jen Fong did a website called Meet Spaces, where it takes like a little clip of you as an animated GIF and like puts it's like IRC meets Snapchat, basically. And one day, suddenly a whole bunch of press, French 20-somethings, loved it. And the thing is, like, people didn't necessarily think that that was going to be their target market, but especially if you're selling something, why would you turn down any market whatsoever? So I encourage you that when you're considering your target demographic to not totally be North American-centric. That being said, I know the people in the room probably care the most about iOS and Android, and so those are largely what we're going to talk about today. But please consider going to other markets and other browsers. So the first thing, of course, was figure out your target demographic, because that will help you decide what your target devices and browsers are. Maybe you're targeting iOS 6 up and a particular subset of iOS devices. Maybe you're targeting a particular subset of Android devices. Maybe you have a lot of enterprise clients that happen to be using BlackBerry and you need to use BlackBerry, hopefully not using web fonts, which we learned in the last talk. So that's a very important consideration. And deciding the target devices and browsers is really important because they will frame how your website is created based on the constraints that they have. So the next thing people are usually their intuition is that I want to start designing stuff, right? Okay, so I know who I'm designing for, I know what viewports I'm designing for, I'm going to hop right into Photoshop perhaps, and I'm going to make some assets. No, bad, don't do it. I really recommend prototyping in your browser. Use a little bit of structural HTML and some minimal CSS to kind of get the layout right. And actually, don't open Photoshop yet. Try and avoid using Photoshop until you really are at the last stages of needing that visual look and feel. You can put in placeholder content using a lorem ipsum generator and, of course, using some dummy cat images, which I insist are the best content placeholders for images. But don't worry about all the visual look and feel, because what I've noticed that developers will do when they're designing stuff is they'll get really hung up on making the rounded edges and drop shadows look really good, but they'll ignore till the last possible minute layout issues, which would have been a lot easier to debug if they had a lot less CSS to deal with. So actually, I recommend prototyping in your browser. Don't open Photoshop yet, that can come later. And you want to be designing inside the browser with these contextual constraints of the devices and the viewports that you're interested in. Kind of like when an artist picks a canvas, right? An artist picks a canvas and everything they put on the composition of that canvas, that format, is constrained by the canvas. And the same is true for any kind of development or composition that we're creating on the web for people to look at. Similarly, when you're selecting things to use as placeholder content, make sure that they are proportional to what you would expect in the final product. What I mean by this is, if you're doing something that's a blog and you expect the content to vary a lot, make sure that your placeholder content, as you develop your layout, varies a lot. If you're doing a really targeted product placement on a landing page and the measurements need to be just right to get there's a spotlight coming in on your fancy product and there's a drop shadow behind it, pick something that roughly reflects that as well. Now this may seem really obvious to some people in the audience, but I can't tell you the number of people who have come to me trying to debug a layout issue only to drastically change the layout before production and reintroduce new layout issues. So content shapes design. So the thing that I like to use when I'm working on stuff first, actually, is the responsive design view in Firefox. And that's actually not just because, hold on a sec here. It's actually not just because I work for Mozilla. I'll explain why in a sec, because in Chrome there's actually a device emulator as well. I think for the early stages of design that the Firefox responsive design view is an excellent tool and what you should be using. When you start getting closer to device testing, I think that Chrome's device emulator is what you should be using, and I'll explain that when we get a little bit further. So if we pop over to, oh gosh, this is so tiny on my screen. Hold on here. Ooh. Oh God, no, it's going to disappear. Come back. Okay, hold on a sec here. Oh, no, okay. This is the least fun part of the talk. Okay. Let's just come out of full screen mode for a second here. You can laugh. It's totally OK. All right, so we're looking at the JSConf website. I was originally going to use the CSSConf one, but it's a single page, and it's actually beautiful, and I really couldn't nitpick on it. But there are some things we can poke around with in the JSConf website, which we'll do in a moment here. So if you're unfamiliar with the responsive design view in the Firefox DevTools, in the lower right corner, there's this little box, and it looks kind of like a rectangle in a rectangle. That apparently means responsive design view. And what happens when you click it is it brings up a number of buttons, and it will resize your viewport to represent the kind of device that you're looking for. And from the drop-down here, we have a number of different sizes. But what I like about this when comparing it to, say, the Chrome emulator is I actually like that there's these little sliders on the sides. Because when you're designing for mobile viewports, you kind of don't want to design with absolute dimensions in mind. There's a lot of variation in how different devices and browsers actually deal with viewport dimensions, and it can be a really big headache. So you might have some variation between all these devices, and I sort of look at it as like I want to target 320 by 480-ish. And for those of you who are not native English speakers, the suffix "ish" expresses a degree of uncertainty. So when I say I want it to be 320-ish, I want it to be about that wide. But what I like to do when I'm designing is actually just kind of fiddle around with this sidebar and just see how my text reflows, so I can figure out really sensible font breakpoints for my media queries. So that's pretty awesome. And then this actually just came to me last week because we got this eyedropper tool, right? Who here has used ColorZilla? Yeah, and then there's equivalent plugins for Chrome and stuff like that. So we got this awesome color picker tool in Firefox, which on its own is really not that interesting. The thing that I found myself using it for, though, more than an actual color picker, was using it to inspect layout issues and being able to inspect JPEG artifacts and stuff like that. So actually, this thing ends up being really, really helpful for someone like me who has terrible, terrible eyesight and won't see that stuff, and someone else looks at it, they're like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I'm blind. Not even a joke. So I actually find that that's actually pretty helpful too. Now, if we pop over into Chrome, I've got this little panel that when you enter the dev tools and press escape, right down here on the left, you'll see there's some tabs for emulation and also for rendering, which we'll talk about in a bit. So if I click emulate with this drop-down selected here for Apple iPhone 5, I press that button, it resizes it should resize the viewport. Let me try refreshing it. It's a little bit buggy. So I think this is a really awesome tool, and it shows a lot of potential. One of the reasons why I'm using the responsive design view is because I don't have to refresh the page every time I change the dimensions, whereas I find with this tool I have to, although that could go away because I think there's work that's going to happen on it. And so I don't like having to do that. Nobody likes spamming refresh. That's why we have auto reload for a reason and stuff like that. So this is actually a pretty good tool. If you prefer being in Chrome, I think this is also excellent. And they give you a lot of great customization options. So you can select from the drop-down one of these presets, or you can go into the screen, user agent, and all that, and select something that's specific. One of the other things I really like is that they do let you emulate the device pixel ratio. So if you're serving up a version of your site that has higher resolution assets for high pixel ratio devices like the iPhone 5 and such, you can actually spoof that here, which I think is pretty great. All right, so where was I? So right after you start debugging your layout stuff, whether it's with the responsive design view or using Chrome's device emulator, I actually encourage you at that point, still, before you get any of your assets into your document, to start testing on devices. Debug that layout stuff early. Really, really trust me on this, because later on, once you've added all your assets and you're trying to figure out why something doesn't look right, you're going to have to go through all that CSS that you've written since this point, which I'm warning you about, and deal with that. And we're going to talk about remote debugging and on devices a little bit towards the end. In the meantime, we're actually going to talk about some cross-browser issues and the major ones that I've run into. So again, start testing on devices. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Do not do anything else. Don't be tempted and lured in by the seductiveness of working in Photoshop, because it's really, really fun. I like it too. Because it will get frustrating from here. There will be lots of surprises. And usually they have to do with cross-browser and cross-device issues. It was really funny when I was making this talk. I wasn't sure how much time I wanted to spend on this until I found myself spending a lot of time on this, which I think is really how you describe any sort of cross-browser, cross-device issues. This is the least fun part of making stuff on the web. Although for a few people out there who, I don't know, I consider them masochists, they seem to get a great deal of pleasure out of it. So, a long time ago, actually not long ago enough, we had this browser that everybody disliked called Internet Explorer 6. Now, to Internet Explorer's credit, newer versions of Internet Explorer are actually really awesome. The latest versions have some really awesome performance profiling tools in them. And I'm not going to be the first or last person to say this, but Android 2.3 is the new IE6. And I've got a checklist here of some common pitfalls, because I found that when people were coming to me with applications and web pages, that I actually didn't have a lot of problems with most other browsers. It's just that this one I had a huge headache with, and it's a pain in the butt to debug for a lot of different reasons. The thing is, we're at Android 4. What now? Like 4.4? blank looks in the audience. So we're Android 4 point something, and we still need to support 2.3. From browsing around the web and doing my research on this talk, and also speaking to some mobile application companies in Vancouver who have much more experience than I do on this, it's really unclear to me how many people are actually still using Android 2.3. Some numbers put it at 25%. Some numbers put it at 15%. It's still a significant portion of the market that you might care about, and so you should probably support Android 2.3. However, it is definitely a pain. So for example, the first one is that position fixed basically just doesn't work well at all on Android 2.3. And actually, it turns out that position fixed doesn't really work that great on iOS in general, too. So stay away from fixed position if you can in your layout, and you will save yourself a whole lot of headaches. Now, the interesting thing about position fixed is that people figured out this little interesting hack called backface visibility hidden. And there are different variations of it. People will apply this to various divs and elements that they want fixed positioning on. They'll apply it to elements that apparently they want better scroll performance on. And I know that Paul Irish is here. He'll be talking more about scroll performance later today, so I don't want to talk about that too much. And you'll also see that sometimes they add perspective, and sometimes they add like transforms to it. And the premise behind this is that for these screens, like WebKit and Blink in particular, can promote elements that have these qualifying properties to their own layer, so you can get improved performance of these elements on older Android devices. Now, it can end up being a problem, though, sometimes if you overuse this, and it's not a blanket solution. If you don't have enough virtual RAM, you can end up with worse performance, and the transfer of the work from the CPU to the GPU can actually take a performance hit as well. And so, actually, the jury is out on this one for me. I would love to actually talk to more people, because I've done that, and we still kind of didn't agree. Like, for example, I went and talked to a bunch of people at Mobify. Mobify is a company in Vancouver. I pop in there now and then and talk to them about mobile stuff, because that's what they do all day, every day. And they were like, Angelina, backface visibility, no, huge performance problems, it's not worth it. We deal with websites where people use it all over the place, and apparently using it multiple times can cause huge performance problems. But if you search for if you search for solutions to the problems of position fixed on Android and respectively iOS, you will find this as the recommended solution in different variations of this sort, and also sometimes in relation to scrolling performance, because pushing it onto the GPU can theoretically make it more responsive. So your mileage may vary on this one. I don't want to like hands down recommend this. I want you to use this judiciously and make up your own mind. So yes, it can cause more performance issues than it solves. So if you're on Android 2.3, using min height, min width, max width, they behave inconsistently. I've noticed that min width and max width will behave pretty good, but min height and max height don't even bother. They just won't stretch the way that you think they will, and it's really annoying. So just avoid those if possible. Overflow auto, nope, just don't use it. Sometimes it kind of works, and then actually, the times that it kind of works, you'll have a container, and the text will overflow, but then kind of be cut off in a weird way, and then nobody can read it, so just don't. Just stay away from overflow auto. So yeah, just don't use it. And the z-index. Now, z-index is another one that comes up a lot. It has a lack of respect for absolutely positioned elements, which is really annoying, because often with mobile designs, you want to have a sticky header at the top that you'll absolutely position. Sometimes, and I don't really like this one, websites will have little tabs on the side that you can click on that are social or contact things. And so I think that absolute positioning is actually a pretty important thing for mobile in this respect, considering how people use it. However, it turns out this is actually very easy to set. Just make sure that you add a z-index on the body tag, and make sure that that is set, well, to 0, and then all the other index elements will stack on top of it. A lot of the time, people will just give something a z-index, but not think that they want to have a z-index beneath that element. It's something that just kind of works out of the box in other browsers, but here, this is the easy fix for it. So if you ever have z-index problems with absolute positioning, this is the trick for you, this one weird trick. So the other caveat is M's are poorly supported. And M's are kind of the cornerstone. They're like the gold standard unit that people use for responsive design. I guess percentages and M's that I probably see the most. And they're kind of janky. You can still use them, but it'll be frustrating for you. Rems, don't even think about it. Now, interesting thing, though, I found out that the X unit is supported. So if you want to start designing in X units, then hey, your problems are solved. So I don't know if that's really gonna, I don't really know if this information is gonna spur an entire design paradigm shift, but if you are targeting Android 2.3, maybe you consider using a slightly different unit of measurement. Gradients? Nope. Nope, not on Android 2.3. Don't even try it, they're not there. which is, you know, they're not really the best performing property anyway, which we'll get to in a little bit. So when we go to iOS, however, the interesting thing about the iOS market share for browsers is that right now, about 80 to 90-ish% of people are on iOS 7. And it wasn't released that long ago. I mean, Apple, they pester people. Like, I just plugged it. I've got an iPhone, amongst other devices. And I plugged that thing in. And every time, I swear, like every couple days, it wants me to upgrade to a new version. And so I do, because I don't want to be pestered anymore. And this actually really works, because there's only about 10, maybe 15, 20%, if we fudge those numbers, left of iOS 6 users, which is really great, because it means that we've got this really forward-thinking set of people that are using newer features that we want to design with. Note that @media queries give portrait dimensions even after rotating to landscape, which is a complete pain in the butt. Position fixed, also buggy, even on iOS 7, also very annoying. Now, Flexbox is something that, to I think most developers, is kind of a bit of a godsend, right? I mean, like, it just seemed really great to be able to express things in proportions and have the browser figure out the rest. However, it's been through several iterations of declaration, I suppose, and several iterations in the spec, and so there are a number of different declarations. Chris Coye of CSS Tricks recommends that you use this declaration. And the order matters because the display property is not prefixed here. So if you're ever using Flexbox, this is the magic incantation that should work on any Chrome, any Firefox, Opera 12 Plus, I think, IE 10 Plus. The IE just does not have really great Flexbox support, but we're talking about mobile, so who cares? And Android should work on those too. And Firefox and Chrome on Android, which are browsers that are not as popular as Mobile Safari and 2.3, and actually 2.3, and then Chrome on Android, since you know, Google introduced that, has been kind of gaining, and 2.3 is slowly waning. Both Firefox and Chrome on Android are pretty close to their counterparts, or identical to their counterparts on desktop when it comes to the rendering engines inside. So you shouldn't have a whole lot of problems with those. I certainly don't, which is great, because by that point, I'm really, really tired, and I just kind of want to move on. So everyone else has edge cases too, like if you do have to ship on BlackBerry, if you do have to ship on Opera Mini, there are lots of those. These two resources, corksmo.org, which has been around for a long time, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is great. But this particular GitHub repo from Scott Gel has a tracker of basically people filing device-specific issues and inconsistencies, and that is also a really excellent resource. So if your layout is decent by this point, then I think that it's time to consider performance. And you want to use this point when your layout is mostly decent between browsers as sort of your baseline. Because as soon as you start adding really, really nice stuff like graphics and web fonts, you're adding HTTP request overhead and such. So I would use this as your baseline for performance. And as you add various things to your page to enhance your content, you want to be comparing constantly to make sure that you're not doing something that gives you like a 15 meg page load. I'm super into Sailor Moon, by the way. Like, you really needed to know that. And if you go to the Sailor Moon official website, because they're releasing a new series soon, I was like wanting to inspect it because they've got like some stars and it's all mystical and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is really, really cool. But it was the only page I've ever been to in years where every page had a loading spinner, and the page weight was something like 15 megs. And even on mobile, it was really heavy. So I was like, man, I love Sailor Moon, but not that much. So a crash course and a few performance problems for mobile. Selector and property performance. Now, browsers are fast, so I don't want you to like labor over your selectors and your properties, like trying to hyper-optimize them. The browser will mostly take care of stuff for you. So browsers are fast, except for when they're not. And generally, the rules of thumb that I've found are stay away from the star selector. Just avoid it if you can. Stay away from really, really long class names, because you're going to have to like go through lots of trees to find what you're looking for. Border radius, big performance culprit. Box shadow, also a performance culprit, although border radius seems to actually do worse. Transforms, specifically rotations, will kind of give you some janky performance as well. And also check your preprocessor output. If you take a look at this top example and you take a look at the bottom example, can anybody in the audience tell me what the problem is with what's generated in the bottom example? What's that? someone said something about IE7. Okay, so the issue with what's generated on the bottom is that it's created this class where it's actually got to go through all of the tree for steps in order to find out if anything applies to or is going to apply to it IE7. So we'll go through all of this tree, and the thing is that IE7 rule might not apply to any of those things in the page, so we don't actually need that. Now, CSS coverage analysis is pretty important because the fastest rule is one that doesn't exist. So if you go into Chrome and we're looking at the, where are we here, audits page, and we run this happy little tool, let's get rid of that, and we look at web page performance, it will actually tell us, hey, remove these unused CSS selectors. And that's really helpful, but this is only run on one page. So if we pop over to Firefox and hop into here, we actually have this new tool that just landed in Nightly. And if I go, let's see here, let's turn off the responsive design view. There's actually a developer toolbar at the bottom, or there should be. Where are you? Oh no, it's down there, I just can't see it. All right, okay. Oh, and it's super tiny for me. CSS coverage start. So we start the CSS coverage tool, little bar tells us that it's running, and we navigate to different pages. And what the CSS coverage tool does is it aggregates all of those pages, and then when we hit the X here, it will actually go, and we go into JSConf.css, you'll actually see some rules, and it's very hard to see, but they have a strike through them. And this is a little bit different to what you would normally see in the inspector, in that it's actually showing us rules that this tool has reason to believe are not used at all and could be removed safely on the pages that we've just browsed. However, that may not be true because some of these styles might be applied with JavaScript at some later point. And we didn't go through every page, so for example, the one that says curator, I know for a fact that one exists on the about page, so that's applied there. And then if we type CSS coverage report, you get this nice little pie chart which will tell you the styles that are relevant before the load event is fired and which aren't. And this means that you can actually optimize your pages a little bit, and what I'm about to tell you is a little bit counterintuitive. If there are styles that you absolutely need, put them in a style tag in your head, and if there's styles that you don't need, take the link tag and actually put it with your JavaScript that you defer as well at the bottom of your page. Now I know you want to separate your structural stuff from your presentation, and so at some point that sort of does break down, but if you can get away with it, do it, because you can actually get some performance gains that way. Okay, I am drastically running out of time, so let's blow through this. Right, so the fastest rule is one that isn't there. When you get to the very last stages of production, go through and try and remove the stuff that is cruft from maybe your CSS framework, like styles that are unused, and just do a general clean that way. One of the things that I like to do is take all the styles that I apply with JavaScript and put them in a CSS file and then run a grunt task that goes through all the stuff except for that CSS file and basically takes out all of the cruft for me. That is one method that I recommend. So we just did that one, awesome. Network conditions, you are only as good as your worst case, and not everybody has really, really fantastic network conditions. And also, if you happen to be driving through the countryside of Montana, well, hey, maybe your coverage isn't that great. Actually, it's pretty good now. But on OS X, using Charles or the network link conditioner will allow you to spoof differing network connections. This is really great to see exactly how progressively your page loads, really explicitly. Windows, Charles, and DummyNet and NetLimiter, and Linux, Charles. So basically, use Charles. It's great. It's a couple bucks, and I think it's a really, really great tool. You can also measure FPS, which is a great way to look at your performance for different interaction animations and scrolling. Chrome, if you go back into the tiny menu we were in, has, where do we go here? There we go. Okay, so we actually have rendering. We have an FPS meter. So this is the thing. So the one caveat that I don't like about this right now is if I get out of device emulation, I will have the FPS reader or FPS widget, but if I'm in the emulation mode, I don't have the FPS widget, and I would really, really want that for mobile. But there's a really great FPS widget in Chrome, which is really great for testing out your performance. And in Firefox, we have a little tool that's going to be in the profiler that will give you your lowest FPS, your highest FPS, and the average. And actually, it's pretty important that your FPS is stable and above about 30 FPS at minimum, rather than having it jump all over the place. Like maybe sometimes it's 60 and sometimes it's 20. If you can't get it to stick at something consistent, it's not going to be great for your end users. So testing on devices, so we can wrap this all up, right? We want to remote debug like pros, because when we get to this point, after we've gone through designing this thing and testing it in the, maybe in Chrome's device emulation panel, you want to actually test on devices because that's what matters. One of the things I like to do is set up a little local server and then like navigate my device to it, but I don't get developer tools with that, and if something goes wrong, it's not very easy. I mean, if you've got a good eye, you can spot some layout bugs, and that's pretty fantastic. So solution is just to buy all the phones, right? Yeah. One argument that I've been giving to people, though, is actually to get your hands on a Firefox OS device because they're cheap and lots of device labs have them, just because if anything can run on there, it will run everywhere else. They are not high-powered devices. So if it runs there, it will run everywhere. They're very cheap to buy. Android 2.3 browser, you're going to be using Winery, which is a script remote debugging tool that injects some script into your page, and you get kind of like a janky version of the Safari WebKit tools, but it's not fully functional. It's very frustrating. So if you're still trying to remote debug on 2.3, Godspeed. So if you're debugging Firefox or Firefox for Android, use Firefox. Debugging Chrome for Android, use Chrome. You're going to see a problem here. Debugging mobile Safari. OK, finally, as of iOS 6, we can do that with Safari's DevTools. And I did learn that there is actually a Chrome bridge, although it was unclear to me exactly how to do that, and it didn't quite work out of the box the way I expected. But it's there. So the problem here is that everybody is in silos. Personally, I think that our tools should go where the web is, and that is everywhere. And I don't like the idea that I have to work in silos to do all of my remote debugging. So I wanted to give you, before I go, a little sneak peek into something that's coming with the Firefox DevTools that I think really will help solve some of this problem for people, and it is called Project FEVERDREAM. We like to name things a little bit ridiculously internally, so it reminds us to change the name. So pop over here. Huzzah. So what I'm going to show you is our DevTools connecting to Firefox. We're just going to change some text. It says shared knowledge. It'll change to tools everywhere. And then we'll change the background to a color pink that we call Paul Rouget pink. Paul is a member of the DevTools, and he's well known for making things stand out with this pink. And then we'll just go through and do a console alert so that we can see that, yes, we are connected, and it will say hello from Firefox. OK, well, that's great. We knew that Firefox could connect to the Firefox DevTools, and I apologize for the quality here. We just whipped this up at the last minute. We're doing the same thing. We're going to change the text on there. We're connected to Chrome on Android with the Firefox DevTools. And we're also going to change it to Paul Rouget pink and do an alert. But of course, what most people care about is the most used market share, and they care about iOS. And so right now, we've worked hard on that and made it so that you can actually connect using the Firefox DevTools. It's hard to see. It's an iPad there running Safari. You can connect and debug Safari, which with much better DevTools now than the Safari ones, which, sorry, Safari, they just really, really stink. So we're going to change the background to Paul Rouget pink, and if everything works, it should say hello from Safari. So this feature, unlike the ones that I showed you today, hasn't totally landed yet. So it's going to be coming. If you're interested in that, then you can follow me, because I won't shut up about it. And also, you can follow Firefox DevTools on Twitter. So that's it. Oh my God, I totally forgot one really important thing, and it's totally amazing. OK, so just like this one thing. The guy in the front row is giving me the stink eye, so I know I'm supposed to be done. But I promise you that this is helpful. One thing that just landed, thanks to Heather Arthur, who's here, is if you go into the style editor, style sheet is unhappy because it couldn't be loaded. That's cool. We go into the style editor, and we right-click on one of these style sheets, and we actually take a look over on the right here. You'll see that there are actually media queries that are highlighted. If you're using the responsive design view and resizing it, it will actually highlight which media queries apply to your page, and if you click on them, it will take you to those media queries in your code. And that is the last thing I have for you today. Thank you very much, everyone.